The nurse's hands trembled as she held the envelope. Inside was a single photograph of a little girl with dark eyes that seemed to hold every unanswered prayer Sarah had ever whispered into the darkness. She didn't know this child. She had no connection to this family. But somehow in that moment, looking at those eyes staring back at her through time and distance, Sarah understood that her entire life had been leading to this precise second. The letter attached was brief. "Her name is Maya. She has 3 months. Please." That was all. No explanation of who sent it, no return address, just a desperate plea from somewhere across an ocean she'd never crossed. Sarah's throat tightened as tears blurred the photograph. 3 months. 12 weeks. 84 days for a child to find hope, or to slip away into a statistic that no one would remember. She pressed the photo against her chest and made a decision that would either save a life or break her completely. Sarah Chen had spent 15 years in pediatric oncology, long enough to build walls around her, heart that were supposed to protect her from exactly this kind of pain, long enough to know that medicine had limits, that insurance had barriers, and that some children fell through cracks so wide they seemed designed to swallow the innocent whole. She'd learned to compartmentalize, to care deeply during her shifts and then leave it all behind when she walked through her apartment door each night. But Maya's photograph wouldn't stay in any compartment. It followed her everywhere. The research consumed her. Maya lived in a village outside Chennai, India, suffering from a rare blood disorder that required a bone marrow transplant and ongoing treatment, costing more than her family would earn in 20 lifetimes. The local hospital had done what it could, but without the specialized care and medications available only in certain facilities. The prognosis was exactly what that letter had stated. 3 months, maybe less. Sarah didn't know why someone had sent her this information. Perhaps they'd heard she'd once helped coordinate international medical cases. Perhaps it was random desperation. A message in a bottle thrown to any shore that might respond. Whatever the reason, it had found her and she couldn't let go. She started small, mentioning Maya's case at work, testing the waters. Her colleague David raised an eyebrow over his coffee. "Sarah, we can't save every kid in the world. You know that better than anyone." He wasn't being cruel, just realistic, speaking the truth that kept most healthcare workers sane. But Sarah had stopped being interested in sanity. Somewhere between the first and 100th time she'd read that letter, she created a crowdfunding page at midnight, writing Maya's story with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. She shared it with her small circle of friends and family, expecting maybe a few $100s, enough to at least send some medication to buy a little time. But something unexpected happened. Her cousin shared it. Then her cousin's friend. Then a stranger in Ohio who'd lost her own daughter to leukemia. The story spread like light through cracks, reaching people who'd been waiting without knowing it for a way to matter, for proof that individual goodness could still tip the scales against impossible odds. Within a week, they'd raised $8,000. Within 2 weeks, $23,000. Sarah watched the numbers climb with disbelief, reading comments from people she'd never meet. A retired teacher in Maine who donated her late husband's birthday money. A teenager in Texas who'd given the cash from his summer job. A grandmother in Florida who simply wrote, "For Maya, for all of them." The donations weren't just money. They were small. Rebellions? Against helplessness. Tiny declarations that distance and differences didn't have to mean indifference. But even as the fund grew, Sarah hit walls. International medical transfers were complicated labyrinths of paperwork, visas, hospital agreements, and insurance complications. She spent hours on the phone with administrators who explained politely why it was impossible. She contacted organizations that wanted to help but couldn't navigate the bureaucratic maze. Her own hospital expressed concerns about liability. Every door seemed designed to stay closed. It was Marcus, the hospital's janitor, who changed everything. Sarah had broken down crying in an empty corridor. At 2 in the morning, after another dead end, called to an embassy official. Marcus, who she'd exchanged pleasantries with for years but never really known, sat down beside her on the floor and listened to the whole story. When she finished, he pulled out his phone and made a call. "My brother," he explained quietly. "He works with an international medical nonprofit. They've done this before." Within days, Marcus's brother connected Sarah with a network she hadn't known existed. Doctors, lawyers, and activists who specialized in exactly these impossible cases. They knew which strings to pull, which forms to prioritize, which officials would listen. The fund had reached $60,000 by then, enough to cover the transplant and a year of treatment. The organization agreed to help coordinate. Maya's transfer to a partner hospital in Chicago. Sarah thought that was the miracle, the peak of what kindness could accomplish. She was wrong. When Maya arrived at O'Hare International Airport 8 weeks later, over 200 people were waiting. The crowdfunding community had organized it themselves, families who'd donated, medical staff volunteering their time, strangers who'd followed the story and wanted to witness the outcome of their collective compassion. Sarah stood at the front, her hands shaking again, but this time with something beyond fear. When Maya's mother carried her through the arrival gate, a tiny girl with those same dark eyes from the photograph, wrapped in a blanket, covered in lions, the crowd erupted in applause that felt like prayer. But the story everyone had been following, the miracle they thought they'd witnessed, was only the beginning. During Maya's treatment, as Sarah visited her hospital room daily, she met 17 other families whose children were fighting similar battles. Some had insurance that didn't cover experimental treatments. Others were undocumented and terrified to seek help. 2 were foster children with no one advocating for them at all. Sarah saw the same desperate hope in their eyes that Maya's mother had carried across an ocean. She couldn't look away anymore. She didn't want to. Sarah quit her staff position and used her savings to start a nonprofit, building on the network that had formed around Maya. She called it Her. Simple, direct, impossible to forget. Not them or those children, but her, making it personal, making it impossible to dismiss any suffering child as an abstraction. The organization focused on navigating the bureaucratic nightmares that kept families from accessing care their children desperately needed. Marcus became her first board member. David, her skeptical colleague, volunteered his medical expertise. The crowdfunding community that had saved Maya became an army of advocates, each person contributing what they could: time, money, professional skills, or simply the willingness to show up. 15 months after receiving that first photograph, Sarah stood in Maya's hospital room watching her laugh at cartoons, her head covered in new hair growing back after successful treatment. Maya's mother squeezed Sarah's hand and whispered, "You gave her tomorrow." But Sarah knew the truth was more complicated and more beautiful than that. Yes, she'd acted first, but she hadn't saved Maya alone. It was the teacher in Maine, and the teenager in Texas, and the grandmother in Florida. It was Marcus making a phone call on a corridor floor, and his brother, leveraging connections built over decades. It was hundreds of people choosing to care about a child they'd never hold, in a place they'd never visit, simply because suffering shouldn't require proximity to matter. Maya wasn't saved by one person's heroism, but by collective refusal to accept that some children were too far away or too expensive or too complicated to help. The photograph still sat on Sarah's desk, but now it was surrounded by dozens of others, children whose lives had been reshaped by strangers who'd decided that impossible was just another problem requiring enough people who wouldn't accept it. Every face was a reminder that the power of humanity wasn't found in grand gestures, but in the accumulation of small decisions to show up, to give what you could, to refuse to look away. Her. Not an abstract cause, but a specific child with specific eyes holding specific dreams that deserved protecting. And then another her. And another. Each one impossible to save alone. Each one saved by many hands reaching across distances that suddenly didn't seem so vast after all.